Who is Roboute Guilliman? Roboute Guilliman, also known as the Avenging Sun, is the Primarch of the Ultramarines, an accomplished warlord and diplomat who ruled his own empire before rediscovery by the Emperor. Guilliman was unique among his brother Primarchs in that he saw himself as not only a warrior, but also a builder of civilizations. In addition to his leadership of the largest Space Marine Legion during the Great Crusade, Guilliman became renowned for his efforts to preserve the Imperium in the aftermath of the devastating Horus Heresy, becoming Lord Commander of the Imperium. Among his most noteworthy achievements is the authoring of the Codex Astartes and the creation of the modern imperial military structure. Shortly after the 13th Black Crusade, Guilliman was restored from his wounds and now once again leads the Imperium as its Lord Commander and Imperial Regent, the living voice of the Emperor. Like the other Primarchs, Guilliman was one of 20 genetically engineered sons of the Emperor. Like his brothers, Guilliman was taken as an infant by the powers of chaos and removed to a far-flung world in an effort to prevent the coming age of the Imperium. The infant Guilliman's capsule fell to Earth on Makaraj, where it was discovered by a group of noblemen hunting in the forest. Inside the capsule, they found a child surrounded by a glowing aura. He was taken back to Connor, one of the two consuls who governed Makaraj, who adopted the infant as his son and named him Roboute. Guilliman's arrival on Makaraj was a portentous time, and many reported strange sights. Most notably, Connor dreamed of the Emperor and found himself beside Harris Falls in the valley of Lapinus. Upon awakening, Connor assembled his bodyguard and rode to Harris's Falls, where they found a child. The name Connor gave the child means the Great One. Guilliman would also be raised by Connor's Celestial, Tarsha Utin, a strong-willed and capable woman. Guilliman was a prodigy, growing fast in both body and intellect. By age 10, he had mastered every subject the wise men of Makaraj could teach him, and his insights into matters of history, philosophy, and science often stunned his elders. However, his greatest talent were as a military leader. These talents led his father to give him command of an expeditionary force to Illyrium, a mountainous region in the far north of Makaraj, whose wild inhabitants had terrorized the civilized regions for years and successfully resisted every previous military campaign. Not only did Guilliman fight a brilliant campaign, but he also earned the respect of the wild men who never again threatened the more civilized parts of Makaraj. While the history books state Guilliman militarily subdued the Illyrians, the reality was more complicated. Rather than engage in a protracted mountain guerrilla war, he simply occupied the Illyrians' sacred shrines. This caused the Illyrians to surge forth to meet his armies, but rather than crush them, then and there, he challenged their chieftain to battle. During the duel, Guilliman only defended himself from his foe's blows, but never launched his own attacks. The chieftain eventually exhausted himself, but rather than slay his enemy, Guilliman instead presented him with the Illyrians' most sacred religious artifact, which centuries before the consuls of Makaraj had stolen. Guilliman's act of diplomacy and humanity convinced the Illyrian chieftain to halt his campaign, seeking to become a just lord like Guilliman instead. It was at this moment that Tarsha Utin realized Guilliman had proven himself a true king. On his return to the capital, Guilliman found the city in chaos, as his father's co-consul, Galen, had attempted a coup. Galen led a faction of Makaraj's nobility who were used to enjoying their wealth and position at the expense of armies of slaves, and resented Connor's legislation favoring the common people, among whom he was immensely popular. Approaching the city, Guilliman and his soldiers saw the city in chaos, being sacked by mobs of Galen's men. While the consul house was under siege, Guilliman left his men to restore order to the city, while he rushed to the consul's house and lifted the siege, only to find his father close to death, surrounded by his loyal bodyguards. He had been mortally wounded by an assassin in Galen's employ, and with his dying breath told Guilliman who was responsible. Guilliman swiftly crushed the rebellion and amid a wave of popular relief assumed the title of sole counsel of Makarich. He set about punishing the treachery and carrying out his father's vision. Galen and his co-conspirators were executed, and their lands and wealth were redistributed to the people. With superhuman energy, Guilliman reorganized Makarich's entire social structure, creating meritocracy where war, office, and honors were given to the hard-working rather than the wealthy and influential. Under his leadership, Makarich prospered as it never had before. While Guilliman was prosecuting his war against the Illyrian rebels, the Emperor of Mankind and his armies had reached the neighboring planet of Ispandor. It was there that the Emperor heard stories of the extraordinary son of Council Connor and realized that he had found one of his lost Primarchs. However, due to an unexpected warp storm, his ship was thrown far off course, and by the time it reached Makarich, Guilliman had been ruling for almost 5 years. When the Emperor reached Makarich, he found a world that was self-sufficient, prosperous, with a strong and well-equipped military, and engaging in trade with nearby systems. Impressed, the Emperor assigned command of the Ultramarines' Space Marine Legion to Guilliman and relocated the Legion's forward base to Makarich. With the exception of the Luna Wolves, no legion conquered as many worlds or conquered worlds as fast or left conquered worlds in such good state during the Great Crusade as the Ultramarines. Whenever Guilliman liberated a world, he would not move on until he had set up a self-sufficient system of defense and left advisors behind to create industry, set up trade routes with the rest of the Imperium, and form a government whose first concern would always be the well-being of the people. At the same time, with the help of his new advisors, Guilliman created a supremely efficient military machine on Makarich and its surrounding worlds that provided the Ultramarines with a steady flow of new recruits. This factor, combined with the minimal casualties suffered thanks to Guilliman's tactical skill, allowed the Ultramarines to become the largest of all Space Marine legions. When Horus was appointed War Master by the Emperor, the reaction among the other Primarchs was mixed. Some supported the appointment out of affection for Horus, some opposed it, and some were cynically accepting. However, Guilliman, Rogel Dorn, and Jagadi Khan supported the appointment, believing in their cool, rational judgment that Horus was really the most worthy of them. For this reason, and because of their military genius, Horus valued Guilliman and Dorn as his closest advisors. Privately, Guilliman held 4 of his brothers in the greatest esteem: Dorn, Sanguinius, Leman Russ, and Ferrus Manus. He referred to them as the Dauntless Few, and pronounced that he would win any war outright if he had any one of those 4 in his legion at the Ultramarine side. Conversely, relations between Guilliman and Lorgar became miserable after the Emperor had the Ultramarines destroy Monarchia and be present during the shaming of the word bearers. While Guilliman carried out these orders to the letter and appeared to be firmly supportive of the Emperor in front of Lorgar, in truth, he was uncomfortable with his actions and upset that the Emperor used his legion as a tool for humiliation that drove a wedge between the Ultramarines and the word bearers. At the outbreak of the Horus heresy, Guilliman and the Ultramarines were tricked by Horus, who sent them to the Viridian system while Horus carried out his treasonous plot. When the treachery was revealed, the Ultramarines were poorly placed to react to it. While the Ultramarines mustered their forces at Kalth in Ultramar, they were attacked by the Wordbearers, and the Legion took heavy losses. However, the Wordbearers had overlooked 2 major points: the unbreakable fighting spirit of the Ultramarines and the brilliance of Guilliman's command. An attempt by Lorgar to assassinate Guilliman with the demon who attacked the bridge of his flagship, forcing Guilliman to be sucked into space and fight several Wordbearers without a helmet, Guilliman was eventually able to reboard his ship and promised to hunt down and kill Lorgar for the betrayal. At the climax of the battle, Guilliman ripped out one of the 2 hearts of Cor Farion, the Wordbearer's commander at Kalth, after he tried to tempt Guilliman to join forces of chaos. Meanwhile, Angron of the Wordbearers and Lorgar of the Wordbearers had launched a shadow crusade on isolated worlds in Ultramar. Their plan was to destroy as much of Ultramar as they could, while the Ultramarines were occupied on Kauth. After the victory at Kauth, Guilliman, presumably under the guidance of his newly reinstated librarians, traveled to an isolated warp jump on the outer fringe of the Ultramar, where he encountered Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, who had just recently finished his war in the Cygnus cluster. The navigators of the Blood Angels had been ordered to find the closest stable warp zone, which many assumed would be Terra. Instead, fate brought them to Ultramar. With the addition of the Blood Angels to his forces, Guilliman pronounced that he could finally begin countering the Shadow Crusade. After Kauth, Guilliman pursued Lorgar, who had since allied with Angron, to the world of Nuceria. There, the Ultramarines engaged with the World Eaters and World Bearers, while Guilliman himself battled Lorgar, finding the once weaker Word Bearers Primarch to be surprisingly capable in combat. The situation for Guilliman got worse when Angron arrived, battering Guilliman with a furious assault and eventually defeating the Lord of Makarich. However, as Angron was about to land the final blow, Ultramarines were able to arrive and safely retrieve their Primarch. As a result of being cut off by the ruin storm created by the traitorous Wordbearers, Guilliman feared the Imperium lost and created a second empire, Imperium Secundus, as a contingency. Many loyalist brothers were brought to Makarich thanks to the activation of the Xenos device known as the Pharos. Not wanting to appear vain and power-hungry like his brother Horus, Guilliman refused to declare himself emperor of the Imperium Secundus, instead initially trying to convince Leon L. Johnson to take the position despite being distrustful of the Dark Angel Primarch's motives. While organizing the creation of Imperium Secundus, Guilliman survived an assassin attempt by the Alpha Legion squad disguised as Oinoid Thiel and other Ultramarines. Later, when Conrad Cruz was let loose upon the Makarich, Guilliman and the Lion battled the Night Lords Primarch together but were led into a trap. Instead of being cornered, Cruz detonated charges and brought the entire structure down upon their heads. Guilliman and the Lion survived thanks to Barabbas d'Antioch, activating the Pharos, which teleported the duo to Sotha. The Lion and Guilliman then made their way back to Makarich, where the Blood Angels had now arrived. Guilliman decided to name the reluctant Sanguinius the regent of the Imperium Secundus. However, Guilliman frequently clashed with his distrustful and taciturn brother, Leon L. Johnson, over policy. Obsessed with hunting for Conrad Cruz on Makarich, the Lion insisted that the Night Haunter be behind rebellious plaguing the world and demanded martial law be instituted. After a suicide bombing hit an Astartes convoy on Makarich, the Dark Angels were deployed by the Lion to establish martial law without Guilliman's express permission. Guilliman and the Lion came to a disagreement over the rebellion in the Illyrian region of the Makarich, with the Dark Angels Primarch wishing to use weapons of mass destruction to flush them out as he suspected Cruz was hiding there. Ultimately, the Lion led the attack into Illyrium, and Cruz was captured. At Guilliman's insistence, he was given a public trial. During the trial, Cruz accused the Lion of ordering secret orbital attacks against the rebellion, which enraged the Dark Angels Primarch and nearly led him to slaying Cruz in the court. Guilliman and Sanguinius dismissed the Lion from Imperium Secundus as response, but later the Lion reappeared and asked to be Cruz's jailer instead. Following the trial of Kurds, Sanguinius, Lion L. Johnson, and Guilliman all agreed to try and breach the ruin storm to reach Terra and aid the Emperor, who they now knew still lived. In the ruin storm, the Loyalist fleet came across a variety of horrors and word of an entity spreading destruction known as the Pilgrim. During the voyage through the ruined storm, Guilliman's fleet was ambushed by traitor forces at Anuri, where the Avenging Sun survived an assassination attempt by the Wordbearers armed with Athamas. Believing he could study the weapons for understanding of the enemy and potentially using it against them, Guilliman kept the blades in his vault. During the Battle of Pairan, Guilliman commanded the Ultramarines personnel as Sanguinius received a vision and he realized that he needed to go where the struggle had begun, Davin. Reluctantly, Guilliman and the lion agreed to trust in Sanguinius, but both had thought they would simply destroy the world upon arriving. While over Davin, Sanguinius shocked the lion by boarding the Invincible Reason and taking the captive Conrad Kurz with him. Sanguinius hoped to use Kurz's prophetic abilities to determine what he was meant to do upon Davin. Sanguinius then commanded a mass landing on the world, and the enraged lion nearly ordered that Davin be subjected to exterminatus, regardless of Sanguinius' presence on it. After horrified, Leon expressed to Guilliman that he believed something was trying to manipulate them to the path of damnation. The Ultramarine Primarch knew that what he must do, and crushed his captive Athame blades with his power fist. He declared he would not be tempted the same way Horus had. At Davin, Sanguinius was trapped within a portal and did battle with the demon Madail, while Guilliman and the lion desperately tried to reach him. A vicious battle erupted both on Davin and above it, in which Guilliman's acting flagship, Samothrace, was destroyed in orbit by the demon ship Veritas Firum. During the battle at Davin's temple, Guilliman and the lion managed to finally fight as brothers, and together they brought down a massive soul grinder. Eventually, Sanguinius was able to escape, and the Space Marine forces evacuated to space. Davin was destroyed by cyclonic torpedoes, and with its anchor gone to the demonic fleet vanished. In the place of where Davin once was, a breach in the rune storm was visible. The path led to Terra, but upon further study, it became apparent that somehow Horus had foreseen this route, and a large blockade was erected to block them. Guilliman and the lion agreed to distract the blockade, while Sanguinius and the Blood Angels made directly for Terra, for that was their destiny. After the death of the ruin storm, Guilliman gathered whatever forces he could and made haste for Terra. In his path lay a large defensive chain of hundreds of worlds manned by the Iron Warriors. In a series of bitter engagements, both sides took heavy losses, but the Ultramarines were able to maintain a steady advance. Ultimately, Guilliman was able to set course for Holy Terra, traveling at a maximum speed as Legion was only hours away along the several other legions. This ultimately decided the Imperium's fate when Horus was forced to gamble by letting the Emperor teleport onto his battle barge. After the aftermath of the Great Betrayal, the Emperor had been incapacitated, and the Space Marines' numbers had been decimated by the defections into chaos and battle losses. The Ultramarines were left as the largest loyal legion. Guilliman assumed the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium. For years thereafter, Guilliman deployed the Ultramarines throughout the galaxy, reclaiming worlds lost to chaos and preventing the loss of still others to rebellion or invasion from outside the Imperium. At the same time, Guilliman reorganized the Space Marine legions as chapters and composed the Codex Astartes, the tome at the Ultramarines, and many other chapters. Guilliman led the assault against the Alpha Legion at Escrador in the aftermath of the heresy, and due to the vanity of Alpharius, he utilized a surprise attack at the heart of the traitors and killed Alpharius in a duel. However, he and the Ultramarines were greatly mistaken in their belief that the snake would die without the head, as indeed the Alpha Legion symbol is a hydra and multi-headed serpent. The Ultramarines were soundly pushed back time and again by the traitor Marines. Undaunted at the loss of their Primarch, Guilliman eventually pulled his forces back into orbit and bombarded the planet from above. Sometime before the Battle of Thalesia, Guilliman tasked the tech priest Belisarius Call with two deeds: the resurrection of Guilliman should he fall, and the creation of a next generation of Space Marines. Later in the Battle of Thessalia against the Emperor's children, Guilliman would be grievously wounded, where Alpharius had not greatly embraced the Chaos powers and was essentially unchanged from his original Primarch form. Fulgrim had been the Eye of Terror, reaping the terrible powers therein, and had been elevated by the Slanesh to a mighty and fell demon prince, who no longer resembled a man, but his original purity form corrupted and augmented by the ruinous powers. Fulgrim was now a serpentine creature of immense stature and multi-limbed. Each limb carried a poisoned sword, and in the clash he stabbed Guilliman in the neck. Guilliman was interred in the stasis field by the Authoritarians and remained frozen in the instant of death, while Fulgrim escaped back to the Eye of Terror. For the next 10,000 years, Guilliman's mortal body remained in stasis. In the Shrine of Guilliman, deep within the Temple of Correction, one of the holiest places in the entire Imperium, some pilgrims claimed that the Primarch's wounds were slowly recovering, a feat credited to the power of the Emperor. Others denied the phenomenon and pointed out the sheer impossibility of change within the stasis field. Yet, enough believed the stories to come and witness for themselves the miracle of the Primarch. Shortly after Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, the destruction of Cadia, the tech priests Balestrius, Call, and Saint Celestine led a group of Imperial survivors into the Webway with the aid of their new Alder allies. The group arrived at Macridge, where Call revealed that he had in fact lived for the last 10,000 years and was ordered by Guilliman himself to complete two tasks in the event of his downfall. One of these was to revive Guilliman, a feat that Call could now accomplish thanks to Eldar aid. Using a suit of power armor that regenerated the wounds inflicted by Fulgrim, Guilliman was restored just as Black Legion forces invaded Macridge. Reborn, Guilliman swiftly drove off the Chaos Invaders before taking in the troops of the Imperium after his 10,000-year absence. Guilliman displayed several miracles after his rebirth, and his mere presence was able to cure any afflicted with a Nurgle-created blindness-inducing illness. Disgusted by decay, superstition, and ignorance that surrounds the modern Imperium, Guilliman convened a war council of his Ultramarines as to what to do next. After several days, he declared his intent to travel to Terra and see his father upon the Golden Throne. However, Guilliman's revival had attracted the gaze of the gods of chaos and demon primarchs, throwing the warp into an uproar. Their journey to Terra, known as the Terran Crusade, became an arduous affair that saw his fleet trapped in the Maelstrom after an ambush by Magnus and his 1,000 sons. Inside the Maelstrom, the Imperial expedition was defeated by Karios, Fateweaver, and the Red Corsairs. With the Primarch himself trapped in the crystal chains made for his own doubts, held by Karios inside a Blackstone fortress, the Imperial expedition seemed doomed. However, thanks to the efforts of the Harlequin Salderne and the fallen angel Cypher Guilliman and the rest of the surviving expedition were freed and escaped towards a webway portal. Guilliman held a portal long enough for his men to escape, defeating the bloodthirster Skarbrand after witnessing the sacrifice of Marshal Alamric. The Imperial expedition eventually arrived through another portal in Luna, but this time were followed by Magnus and his 1,000 sons. On the surface of Luna, Magnus and Guilliman dueled as battle raged around them. Guilliman was overcome by Magnus's psychic abilities until the arrival of reinforcements from Terra that included Sisters of Silence. With Magnus's psychic abilities weakened, Guilliman was able to impale his demonic brother and force him back into the webway as the gate was sealed. Afterwards, Guilliman landed on Terra and gained access to the Emperor's throne room inside the Imperial Palace. Guilliman stood before the Golden Throne alongside Captain General Trajan Valerius, and the Emperor awoke for the first time in a millennia. In a surreal experience with Guilliman could not fully remember, the now nearly inhuman Emperor told him that he was the last hope to save mankind, and brutally assaulted his mind with dark truths of the galaxy and its history. What exactly transpired is unclear. According to Valerius, Guilliman spoke in the silent psychic conversation with the Emperor for several minutes, while Guilliman remembers falling to the ground in agony. Moreover, only minutes seemed to pass for the two, but when they emerged, it had been over a day. Regardless of the truth, Guilliman emerged with a new determination. He gathered his high lords of Terra and declared the Imperium would be reorganized and rearmed under his leadership in order to confront the coming threat of chaos. With that, Guilliman declared himself Lord Commander of the Imperium once more. He later declared himself Imperial Regent, the living hand of the Emperor. One of his first major acts as Lord Commander was to defend Terra itself against the forces of Khorne in the Second Battle of Terra. Guilliman subsequently declared the Indomitus Crusade to reclaim the devastated worlds isolated from Terra by the Great Rift. The campaign was waged for the next century, as Guilliman acted as supreme commander and chief administrator of the Imperium. He simultaneously oversaw vast campaigns spearheaded by Balestius Call's new Primaris Space Marines and sweeping civic reforms which culminated in the Codex Imperialis. As the Indomitus Crusade wound down, he rushed back to the Ultramar to protect his sons from the onslaught of Nurgle. During the Plague Wars, Guilliman survived an assassination attempt by Mortarion, Typhus, and Kugoth on Paremnio. Guilliman was nearly cornered in the trap, but was saved by the efforts of the mysterious young girl that seemed to be a powerful living saint. The Plague Wars came to their dramatic conclusion on Lax. Guilliman learned of the plot being enacted there by Mortarion and Kugoth through interviewing a captured demon host, which, to the objection of his tetrarch Demonicus Felix, his Eldar liaison Elion, and the Grey Knights. Despite knowing he was walking into a trap, Guilliman decided to nonetheless confront Mortarion on Lax. In the blighted world, the two came to blows. Guilliman was able to hold his own for a time, but was eventually defeated by the demon Primarch's warp-enhanced might and resilience. With Guilliman disabled, Mortarion administered the deadly phage known as the God Blight, which was capable of even killing a Primarch. Guilliman remained defiant as he succumbed to the disease, refusing Mortarion's goading to give into Nurgle in order to have the pain end. Seemingly dead for a time, as his spirit hung in the balance, Guilliman experienced a surreal vision of his reunion with the Emperor upon his return. The vision makes it clear that not even Guilliman truly knows what transpired in the throne room that day, save the Emperor awoke for the first time in millennia. In reality, the Emperor's psychic might flowed through Guilliman, and the Primarch was able to spring back to life, causing the shocked Mortarion to flee before the power of his father. Channeling the Emperor directly, Guilliman raised his father's sword and unleashed a psychic attack that cut into the Garden of Nurgle itself. The mighty blow was enough to damage a portion of the garden and wound Nurgle personally. With that, the Primarch fell into unconsciousness. Guilliman reawoke back in orbit over Ex, having been evacuated from Ex by Coloquin's custodians. He met with a militant apostolic to thank him for his part in the victory in Ex, and the priest informed the Primarch that the Emperor was preparing to return. Matteo died shortly after, and Guilliman would declare him a saint in the aftermath of his heroism on Ex. Now questioning his former atheism and preparing to move his attention to the Pariah Nexus, Guilliman began to probe Balestius Call for means to bring the Emperor back. After Ex, he also expressed his intent to leave the Imperium Sanctus and journey into Imperium Nihilus.